The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds.
So here we are again, back then with Chapter 8, Friday Night. We've got a time marker here. The chapter heading is a time marker. It gives us that sense of progression and time moving forward, rising action, narrative progression, and dramatic tension as we feel this is coming to a climax. And it is, because things start to get worse and worse, of course, as the book continues. That's the whole point of rising action in a narrative. Let's have a look at this one then, shall we?
8. Friday Night. The most extraordinary thing to my mind, of all the strange and wonderful things that happened upon that Friday, was the dovetailing of the commonplace habits of our social order with the first beginnings of the series of events that was to topple that social order headlong. If on Friday night you had taken a pair of compasses and drawn a circle with a radius of 5 miles round the Woking sandpits, I doubt if you would have had one human being outside it, unless it was some relation of Stent, or of the 3 or 4 cyclists, or London people lying dead on the common, whose emotions or habits were at all affected by the newcomers.
So notice there how he's using more scientific lexis or mathematical lexis to help the reader to imagine the scale and the influence of what's happened here. It's a 5-mile radius around the sandpits on Horsell Common. And beyond that range, the rest of the world, the rest of Surrey even, hasn't felt the impact of what's happened yet. So this is still early days. It's still building that tension. It's still that rising action as the greater London itself and the country at large hasn't yet experienced the true horror of these Martians. It's just very, very localised at this point. So there's foreshadowing there as well, really, because it's a sense that as yet only the people here know about it, but of course very soon more people will learn of what's happened.
Many people had heard of the cylinder, of course, and talked about it in their leisure. But it certainly did not make the sensation that an ultimatum to Germany would have done.
Ooh, that's an interesting point there, isn't it? An ultimatum to Germany. This is predicting, this is foreshadowing World War I. This is incredible. Written in late 1897, published in 1898, and yet it's sort of predicting the conflict with Germany, which happened, let me do some quick maths, 16 years later? Would you agree with that? Yeah, in 1914. Pretty impressive. He had his finger on the pulse to old H.G. Wells, didn't he? Good old Herbert George.
In London that night, poor Henderson's telegram describing the gradual unscrewing of the shot was judged to be a canard.
So there's a word we don't hear very often anymore. Canard just means like a false rumour or a fake news, really. So even the fact that Henderson got his news out there, it wasn't believed, because as we know from experience, unless people can see something themselves, it can be very hard to convince people to believe something. And, if you think back to the beginning of the coronavirus, people were sceptical. I was sceptical. I remember being on a school trip back from Bradford in January of 2020 to go and see an Inspector Calls, and it was the first case was announced in York on that day we came back on the coach. I remember people asking me then, am I worried? And I was completely ignorant of it. I felt like it was all been blown out of proportion. It would be nothing at all. And look how wrong I was. So people need to see things sometimes to believe them, and this is the case here, that people further than Surrey, people further than Woking really, and further than 5 miles away, aren't prepared to believe what's happening as far as the Martians are concerned. So there's more tension being built there, because we're here with the narrator, we're seeing this happen firsthand. So we know there is a story to be told, and it's frustrating for us that people won't believe that. And so there's more foreshadowing that they will soon learn and they will soon have to believe it.
And his evening paper, after wiring for authentication from him and receiving no reply, the man was killed, decided not to print a special edition. Even within the 5-mile circle, the great majority of people were inert. I have already described the behavior of the men and women to whom I spoke. All over the district, people were dining and supping. Working men were gardening after the labours of the day. Children were being put to bed. Young people were wandering through the lanes, love-making. Students sat over their books.
So we have here an asyndetic list of human behaviour. We've got, first of all, the hendiadys of dining and supping, eating and drinking, and yawning, if you mean, sorry. So the hendiadys there of dining and supping. Working men were gardening, children were being put to bed, young people were wandering through the lanes, students sat over their books. So you've got this asyndetic list of all the blissfully ignorant activities that people do, or were doing at this point, because people do, they carry on with their lives. The world doesn't stop when something like this happens. People carry on until it faces them head on. And this shows just the blissful ignorance and unawareness of general humanity. And perhaps there's a slightly sort of social comment there, or political comment on the fact that humanity is very arrogant and doesn't really look over its shoulder very much because it feels that it's superior and doesn't need to worry. And of course, in this story, humanity does need to worry, and it's a wake-up call to society.
Maybe there was a murmur in the village streets, a novel and dominant topic in the public houses, and here and there a messenger, or even an eyewitness of the latter occurrences, caused a whirl of excitement, a shouting, a running to and fro. But for the most part, the daily routine of working, eating, drinking, sleeping went on, as it had done for countless years, as though no planet Mars existed in the sky. Even at Woking Station and Horsell and Chobham, that was the case.
So more listing here again, you'll notice, of the things people did. So we've got the working, eating, drinking, sleeping. This is what people do. They carry on. And you can, if this were to come up in the exam, you'd want to probably pull together these examples of where listing's been used for the same effect, and essentially to show how people carry on with their lives, ignorant of what's going on and sort of blissfully unaware. You might also want to look at the proper nouns here. We've got Mars, Woking, Horsell and Chobham, just in that last couple of lines of that paragraph, and again just showing that this is trying to base the novel in reality, and by using real proper nouns it gives it that sense of realism. We've seen it before, we'll see it plenty of times again, but it's worth just being aware of that. Again, if this extract comes up, we need to have plenty to say about it, and so it's useful to have those notes in there.
In Woking Junction, until a late hour, trains were stopping and going on. Others were shunting on the sidings. Passengers were alighting and waiting, and everything was proceeding in the most ordinary way. A boy from the town, trenching on Smith's Monopoly, was selling papers with the afternoon's news.
Just an interesting note there that the Smiths is referring to as the W.H. Smiths, which still exists now. The news agency was established even back in the time this was written. So it's a boy who's essentially treading on the monopoly of W.H. Smith selling newspapers, and he's trying to sell papers by hand, out on the streets. Just backing up a little bit there while I'm speaking on this bit, we've got the fact that you've got the hendiadys of passengers alighting and waiting, this sort of carrying on as it would normally in an ordinary way. The world hasn't yet experienced this. It's people only react to what they can see, like I've said before, and it's really showing the ignorance of humanity. And actually the fact that this boy is selling papers, the sort of the commercialism of humanity, the sort of the entrepreneurism, the opportunism of trying to make money in any situation. And here this boy is trying to make some money selling newspapers because he feels that there's money to be made. Like the man selling drinks and snacks at the side of the Horsell Common sand pits. And there he is trying to make some money. In the end, he gets killed because the Martians shoot him with the heat ray. But nonetheless, people will always try and make money where there are crowds of people. And it's sort of showing that ugly side of humanity, that sort of greediness of humanity.
The ringing impact of trucks, the sharp whistle of the engines from the junction, mingled with the shouts of "Men from Mars!" Excited men came into the station about 9 o'clock with incredible tidings. and caused no more disturbance than drunkards might have done. People rattling Londonwards peered into the darkness outside the carriage windows and saw only a rare, flickering, vanishing spark dance up from the direction of Horsell, a red glow in a thin veil of smoke driving across the stars, and thought that nothing more serious than a heath fire was happening. It was only round the edge of the common that any disturbance was perceptible. There were half a dozen villas burning on the Woking border. There were lights in all the houses on the common side of the three villages, and the people there kept awake till dawn. A curious crowd lingered restlessly, people coming and going, but the crowd remaining, both on the Chobham and Horsell bridges. One or two adventurous souls, it was afterwards found, went into the darkness and crawled quite near the Martians. But they never returned. For now and again, a light ray, like the beam of a warship's searchlight, swept the common, and the heat ray was ready to follow.
So here we've got the heat ray and the light ray being compared to a beam of a warship's searchlight. And we saw this before with when the heat ray was described in chapter 5, the heat ray chapter. And H.G. Wells is very keen to find relevant points of comparison. So people don't know what a heat ray is. It's not. We can imagine now what a heat ray. We know things like space rays and lasers and things, and we've grown up with it. But in those days, a heat ray wasn't a thing, so he had to compare it to something more familiar. And here he's using a warship's searchlight, which again gives that very, very strong image of a warship with a huge beam of light, like a lighthouse. You see, I'm doing it now because most of us don't know what a warship looks like, so I'm now comparing it to a lighthouse that we all know what that looks like. If you don't know what a lighthouse is, like a big torch, and it sweeps round. And so making it much more familiar so we can all imagine the ease with which this thing sweeps round and picks off people on Horsell Common.
Save for such, that big area of common was silent and desolate, and the charred bodies lay about on it all night under the stars, and all the next day. A noise of hammering from the pit was heard by many people.
And there we have the use of sensory imagery describing the sounds being heard, the sounds of hammering. Well, of course, that builds more tension because we wonder what's going on in the pit. Are they building something? What's the noise being created by? So more use of rising action and more use of dramatic tension there with the use of sensory imagery.
So you have the state of things on Friday night. In the center, sticking into the skin of our old planet Earth like a poisoned dart, was this cylinder.
So a couple of things here then. If we look at that description, he slightly lowers the register here and he says, so you have the state of things on Friday night. So he starts his sentence with a non-standard connective, so, which makes it seem quite informal and quite conversational, and it's called lowering the register. Or you could also think of it as lowering the formality. He says, so you have the state of things. He's talking to us. He's directly addressing the reader. Direct address. You have the state of things on Friday night. In the centre, sticking into the skin of our old planet Earth like a poisoned dart, was this cylinder. So here he's personifying the Earth as having a skin which is being penetrated by a poisoned dart. So we've got the personification of the Earth. We've got the plural pronoun our into the skin of our old planet Earth. So by using that plural pronoun our, it brings the reader in along with the writer as this collective ownership of the Earth, which has been attacked and poisoned by this cylinder sticking into the skin. It's a very visual metaphor, and it's a very powerful one because we've got the personification there as well, combined with the plural pronoun and the simile, like a poisoned dart. So there's lots of things working there. It's a very rich sentence to look at because all those things are working in synchronicity, in combination to create this effect of our old Earth, our good old Earth, being injured and harmed by this invader, by this cylinder.
But the poison was scarcely working yet.
And there we have that foreshadowing that the poison, so it's an extended metaphor there of poison. He's introduced the idea of poison dart. Now he's extending the metaphor further into the next sentence. The poison was scarcely working yet. So an extended metaphor is when you just drag on the metaphor and use it again in the next sentence or so. And here he's doing that. So the poison is scarcely working yet. That's telling us from his perspective as 4 years down the line that things get much worse. More dramatic tension, more rising action, more suspense.
Around it was a patch of silent common, smouldering in places, with a few dark, dimly seen objects lying in contorted attitudes here and there. Here and there was a burning bush or tree. Beyond was a fringe of excitement, and further than that fringe the inflammation had not crept yet.
Just an interesting side note there. He uses a technique called anadiplosis there when he talks about here and there, and there's a full stop and then he repeats here and there. So anadiplosis is when the first word or first words of a sentence repeat the last word or last words of the previous sentence. So you've got that here and there, full stop, here and there. I mean, it's often used for rhetorical reasons. If he's trying to, in a speech, you might hear it trying to convince people and be really powerful in that sense. Here, I think he's just using it, I think he's just repeating it, but it possibly suggests the range and the areas that are covered by the objects that are lying and sort of hanging around, and the inflammation of what's happening around the pit.
In the rest of the world, the stream of life still flowed, as it flowed for immemorial years. The fever of war that would presently clog vein and artery, deaden nerve, and destroy brain had still to develop.
So there's one of the best examples of foreshadowing that we've found in the book so far, and that we do find in the book. The other word for foreshadowing, if you want to use it, is prolepsis. Prolepsis. Either is fine. You can call it foreshadowing or prolepsis if you wish. It's completely your choice. We tend to use prolepsis more at A level, and but it means the same thing. So you get the same marks either way. And that really is that last sentence there. The fever of war that would presently clog vein and artery, deaden nerve and destroy brain had still to develop. So within that foreshadowing, we've also got a few more things. The metaphor, the fever of war, is a metaphor, and the vehicle of that metaphor is this sort of illness, this fever, which is very fitting because it's sort of the fever that's contagious, that people get wrapped up in war. And then it's extended. The metaphor of war as being a sort of illness is extended to the point that it might clog veins and arteries, deaden nerves and destroy brains. So it's an extended metaphor which uses an asyndetic list, all in the semantic field of illness and of sort of biological breakdown, clogging veins, clogging arteries, deaden nerves and destroying brains. Notice also the heavy alliteration of deaden and destroy, those two words there. Again, one of those rare sentences in the book where lots of things happening, and if this comes up in the exam, you've got lots to say about it, that particular phrase there, all working together to create that effect.
All night long the Martians were hammering and stirring, sleepless, indefatigable. At work upon the machines they were making ready, and ever and again a puff of greenish-white smoke whirled up to the starlit sky.
So a bit of Hendiadys there with hammering and stirring. And then a list here of, well, in fact, hammering, stirring, sleepless, indefatigable, at work upon the machines. So an asyndetic list there as well as the things that they're doing. And what a great word, indefatigable. You'll know from French what that means. If you think of fatigué, meaning tired. So these are tireless creatures. They work night and day upon the machines. They're making ready. And then a puff of greenish-white smoke whirled up to the starlit sky. Again, there you've got we mentioned before about the puffs of smoke and the flashes of light are sort of signifiers for the Martians. They allow the reader to experience the threat of the Martians without necessarily seeing them themselves. And I mentioned how in lots of horror films and stories, authors and filmmakers tend to avoid showing you the monsters. They try and give you symbols instead. And here the puffs of smoke are the signifiers for the Martians. It avoids having to expose the Martians too much to the reader, who would then become too familiar with them. So it's a way of letting us know the Martians are doing things without necessarily describing the Martians in too much detail. And up it goes to the starlit sky. The sort of, this is our sky, the terrestrial sky, looking up, and it's these invaders that are spoiling not only the landscape but spoiling the view of the sky as well. They're sort of ruining everything about the earth and its view.
About 11, a company of soldiers came through Horsell and deployed along the edge of the common to form a cordon. Later, a second company marched through Chobham to deploy on the north side of the common. Several officers from the Inkerman barracks had been on the common earlier in the day, and one, Major Eden, was reported to be missing. The colonel of the regiment came to the Chobham Bridge and was busy questioning the crowd at midnight. The military authorities were certainly alive to the seriousness of the business. About 11, the next morning's papers were able to say, a squadron of hussars, 2 Maxims, and about 400 men of the Cardigan Regiment started from Aldershot. A few seconds after midnight, the crowd in the Chertsey Road, Woking, saw a star fall from heaven into the pine woods to the northwest. It had a greenish colour and caused a silent brightness like summer lightning. This was the second cylinder.
Oh, goodness me, it's happening again. So we've got these proper nouns look of we've got Aldershot and Maxims, no, not Maxims, Maxims are a proper noun, but I'll come back to in a second. Aldershot, Chobham Bridge, the Cardigan Regiment, and then Chertsey Road and Woking, all these proper nouns here.
And the darkness.
And so, hang on a second, what's that? So we've got the place name is to make it more accurate and realistic. And then we've got the references to these weapons, the Maxims. These are quite new, like cannons that were invented around this sort of time. So these are the most powerful weaponry that the British Army had at that time, and here they're being brought out, they're being used. So a sense here about a bit of that sense of security at the end of the chapter, as it seems like they've brought out the big gun, literally the big guns, to fight back the Martians. And but then we get in the last little chapter, last little paragraph, a few seconds after midnight, the crowd in the Chertsey Road, Woking, saw a star fall from heaven. Well, that's a metaphor, isn't it? Because it's not really a star, and it's not really falling from heaven. But that's how it might appear to unknowing onlookers. Into the pine woods to the northwest, it had a greenish colour. Green colour again. We've seen that before, haven't we? It's a signifier for the Martians, and caused a silent brightness like summer lightning. And this was the second cylinder. So that last sentence there, the telegraphic sentence, that short, abrupt, simple sentence, you can call it a telegraphic sentence if you wish, because it just gives you the simple facts with no fluffery buffery, just the facts. This was the second cylinder. There's incrementum there, of course. We've had the first cylinder, and we know what impact that had on people in the Horsell region. And now we've got the second cylinder coming down. Oh my goodness me. Could this book get any more tense? Well, you're in for a treat, because it does. So I'll leave you now to see you again in chapter 9, where the fighting begins. Bye for now.